My brother didn't just yell. He grabbed my son's drone right out of the air and smashed it into the hardwood floor. The sound it made, I still hear it. That sharp, hollow crack of something expensive and irreplaceable hitting the ground. Every single person in that living room went dead silent. My dad, my mom, my sister-in-law, every one of them just froze. And Noah, my 12-year-old boy, stood there with his mouth open, eyes wide, too shocked to even cry. Right then, something inside me snapped. I crossed that room in 3 steps. Daniel saw me coming, and instead of backing down, he let out this bitter little laugh, like I was the one being ridiculous. That laugh, that smug, dismissive laugh. That was the moment I stopped thinking. I grabbed his shoulders and I shoved him hard. He stumbled back, hit the glass coffee table, and went down. Glasses shattered. Someone screamed. And in that exact moment, I knew this wasn't just about a drone anymore. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 38 years old. I'm an ER doctor based in Chicago, and what I'm about to tell you happened just 3 months ago. I've been going back and forth about sharing this, but I think I need to, because I'm still trying to make sense of it myself. So let's start at the beginning. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I was packing up my car in the driveway when Noah came running out of the house, his drone case tucked under his arm like it was made of gold. He'd saved up for that thing for almost a year, cutting grass for neighbors, doing odd jobs on weekends, skipping the stuff most 12-year-olds spend money on without thinking twice. $8,000 worth of drone equipment, and every single dollar of it was his. He looked up at me with this huge grin and said, "Mom, you think Grandpa's gonna let me fly it in the backyard?" Right then, something tightened in my chest, because the honest answer was, I didn't know. I hadn't been back to my parents' house in almost 2 years, and it wasn't because I was busy, though God knows the ER keeps me running. It was because every time I walked through that front door, I left feeling worse than when I arrived. My relationship with my mom had been strained for years, and my brother Daniel, that was a whole other story. But Noah was so excited, he'd been talking about this visit for weeks, so I told myself, just give it one more shot. Maybe things would be different this time. Maybe we'd all grown up enough to get through one holiday without everything falling apart. I loaded the last bag into the trunk, looked at my son's face, and made a decision I'd end up regretting. "Yeah, buddy," I finally said to him, forcing a smile. "I'm sure Grandpa's gonna love it." What I didn't realize was, this visit had been building towards something for years, and I'd just driven us straight into it. It started with something small. It always does. We'd barely sat down at the dinner table when my dad looked across at Noah and said, with so much pride in his voice, "You know, this kid is something else. I'm telling you, Noah's got a real future ahead of him. You can just see it." He reached over and gave Noah's shoulder a squeeze. Noah lit up, and I felt a flicker of warmth too, watching my son soak in that attention from his grandpa. But then my dad kept going. He leaned back in his chair and looked around the table with that satisfied expression I'd seen 100 times before. Smart, focused, driven, reminds me of Emily at that age. He nodded slowly, like he was confirming something to himself. That Carter drive. You either got it or you don't. The table went quiet for just a second, just one beat too long, and in that beat, I glanced over at Ava. She was 11 years old, sitting right next to her dad, and she'd heard every word. She didn't say anything. She just slowly looked down at her plate and moved her fork through her mashed potatoes without taking a bite. Across from her, Daniel had gone very still. I watched his hand on the table. His fingers curled inward, knuckles tightening, just slightly. Just enough for me to notice. My mom reached over and passed the gravy without a word. She didn't redirect the conversation. She didn't say, "Ava's doing great too," or anything like that. She just let it sit there. Let it hang in the air over that table like smoke. My dad, completely unaware, kept going. He started asking Noah about the drone, about his plans, about whether he'd thought about making videos professionally someday. And Noah, sweet kid that he is, answered every question with enthusiasm, totally oblivious to what was happening on the other side of the table. I tried to pull the focus. I looked over at Ava and said, "Hey, how's school been going for you? You were telling me about that art project last time we talked." Ava looked up, a little surprised I'd asked. She started to answer, her voice soft and hesitant. "It's okay. I've been working on this painting for class, and my teacher said." But before she could finish, my dad jumped back in. "Noah, you ever think about doing drone footage for real estate? That's where the money is right now. Big market." And just like that, Ava stopped talking. She pressed her lips together and looked back down at her plate. I felt something sharp twist in my stomach. I looked at Daniel. He was staring at his food, jaw tight, not eating. His wife Sarah put her hand on his arm for just a second, and he shifted slightly away from her. I should have said something right then. I knew it. I could feel the tension threading through that table like a live wire running under the tablecloth. But I didn't speak up. Part of me was scared of making it worse. Part of me, I'm ashamed to say, was just relieved that for once, the pressure wasn't on me. For once, I wasn't the one being measured and compared. So I stayed quiet. I kept my eyes on my plate and told myself it wasn't my place to manage my dad's behavior at his own dinner table. I told myself Daniel was an adult. He could handle it. But even as I thought it, I didn't believe it. Because I knew my brother. I knew what this kind of thing did to him. I'd watched it happen my entire childhood. My dad wasn't trying to be cruel. I genuinely believe that. He loved Noah. He was proud. He just had this blind spot the size of the Grand Canyon when it came to how his words landed on the people who weren't being celebrated. And my mom, sitting there at the end of the table, sipping her water, watching all of it unfold without saying a single word. She was just as responsible, maybe more, because she knew exactly what was happening, and she let it happen anyway. I could see it building. I could feel it in the air, that slow pressure rising like a storm system moving in from the west. But I still didn't stop it. This wasn't new. It never was. To understand what happened that Thanksgiving night, you have to go back. Way back. Growing up in the Carter house, there was always this unspoken scoreboard. And from the time I was old enough to notice, I was winning. Not because I cheated. Not because I pushed anyone down. I just happened to be the kind of kid my dad understood. I got good grades without being told to. I was organized, focused, driven. I wanted to be a doctor from the time I was 9 years old, and my dad, a man who respected ambition more than almost anything else, latched onto that early. He came to every science fair. He helped me study for the SATs. He told anyone who'd listen that his daughter was going to be a doctor someday. And Daniel watched all of it. Every single year. Daniel was 2 years younger than me, and he was a completely different kind of person. He wasn't interested in grades or test scores or 5-year plans. He was creative, funny, restless. He liked building things with his hands. He liked taking apart engines in the garage and figuring out how they worked. He was genuinely talented in ways that were harder to put on a bumper sticker. But my dad didn't know how to talk about that. He didn't know how to brag about a kid who learned by doing instead of by studying, so he mostly didn't. And my mom, instead of building Daniel up on her own, spent her energy managing my dad, smoothing things over, making excuses, telling Daniel in private that his dad was proud of him, even when nothing my dad did in public showed it. Daniel grew up being told he was loved while being shown something that felt a whole lot different. By the time we were teenagers, the damage was already done. Daniel had developed this defensive toughness that he wore like armor. He stopped trying to impress my dad and started resenting him instead. And somewhere along the way, that resentment found a second target. Me. I didn't blame him for it, not really. I was the symbol of everything he felt passed over for. Every time my dad brought up my GPA at the dinner table, every time he introduced me to his friends as my daughter, the future doctor, Daniel was standing right there, hearing what wasn't being said about him. I got into Northwestern on a full scholarship. My dad cried. Actual tears. I'd never seen him cry before in my life. Daniel got a job at an auto shop after high school, and my dad nodded and said, "Well, at least it's steady work." That was it. That was all he got. Steady work. For years after that, Daniel and I existed in this weird orbit around each other. Not close, not completely estranged. Just careful. We'd show up at the same holidays, exchange the same surface-level conversation, and go back to our separate lives without ever touching the real stuff. Then Noah was born. And a few years later, Ava came along. And I watched, with this slow, sick feeling, as the same pattern started up again. My dad lighting up around Noah, asking him questions, engaging with him, pushing him gently toward ambition. And Ava, quiet and artistic and sensitive, getting the same polite half-attention that Daniel had grown up on. I'd seen this movie before. I knew exactly how it ended. And still, sitting at that Thanksgiving table, watching it play out in real time with the next generation, I told myself it wasn't that bad. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself Daniel was a grown man who could handle a tough family dynamic. But the truth was, I knew better. I'd always known better. And our kids were now living the exact same story we'd spent our whole lives trying to survive. When my dad asked Noah to show everyone the drone, I felt two things at the exact same time: pride and dread. Pure, cold dread. Noah had been waiting for this moment all day. He jumped up from the couch with that boundless 12-year-old energy and ran to get his case from the hallway. I watched him come back into the living room, unzipping it carefully, lifting the drone out with both hands like he was handling something sacred. And honestly, it was beautiful. Matte black body, professional-grade camera mounted underneath, the kind of equipment you'd see on a real film set. He'd done his research before buying it, watched hundreds of hours of YouTube tutorials, spent months comparing specs online. This wasn't a toy. This was the real thing. My dad leaned forward in his armchair, genuinely impressed. "Well, would you look at that?" he said, his eyes moving over every inch of it. "That is something else, Noah. That is really something else." Noah stood a little taller. He started explaining the camera specs, the flight range, the stabilization system. His voice was steady and confident in a way that always surprised me, because off a subject he cared about, he could be pretty quiet. But get him talking about this drone and the kid could hold a room. My dad listened to every word, asked follow-up questions, nodded along like Noah was giving a TED Talk. And I have to be honest, watching that exchange, my heart was full. That right there was what I'd been hoping this visit could be. That connection between a grandfather and his grandson. Simple and real and good. Sarah leaned over to me quietly and said, "He's really got a gift for explaining things, doesn't he?" I smiled and nodded. Even that felt like a small miracle. Sarah and I finding something easy to agree on. But then I made myself look around the room. Really look. Ava was sitting cross-legged on the floor near the fireplace, her sketchbook open in her lap, pretending to draw. But her pencil wasn't moving. She was watching Noah with this expression I recognized immediately because I'd seen it on her dad's face for 30 years. That specific mix of genuine admiration and quiet pain. Like she was happy for him and heartbroken at the same time. And she was 11 years old. 11. Way too young to already know that feeling. Daniel was standing near the doorway that led to the kitchen, arms crossed. Weight shifted back onto his heels. He had the look of a man who was working very hard to appear casual. His eyes moved from Noah to my dad and back again, tracking the conversation with an intensity that had nothing to do with drone technology. My mom was in the kitchen. I could hear her moving around, the quiet sounds of dishes being stacked. She hadn't come in to watch. I remember thinking that was strange. Usually she'd want to see what all the fuss was about. But she stayed in the kitchen, like she already knew what was coming and didn't want to be in the room for it. My dad turned to the rest of us and spread his hands wide, that big, proud gesture of his. "You know what? I want to see this thing fly. Noah, what do you say we take it out back after dinner? Let's see what this baby can do." Noah looked at me for permission, eyes wide and bright. I nodded and said, "Sure, Sounds great. And I meant it. I was trying. I really was. But even as I said it, I was watching Daniel. He'd gone very still in that doorway. His jaw was set. His eyes had that flat, distant quality that I'd learned over a lifetime meant he was somewhere inside his own head, somewhere dark and loud, even while his body stood perfectly quiet. My mom appeared briefly in the kitchen doorway, looked at Daniel, then looked at me, then disappeared back into the kitchen without a word. That was the moment the dread sharpened into something more specific. Not a general unease anymore. Something focused and immediate. Because I'd seen Daniel look like that before. Right before things got bad. I wanted to go over to him. I wanted to say something, pull him aside, give him an out. But Noah was already talking again, and my dad was laughing, and the moment slipped through my fingers before I could grab it. I saw Daniel take one slow step forward from the doorway into the living room. And I knew, the way you know a storm has finally made landfall, that something was very wrong. Before anyone could react, it was already too late. But let me back up just a little, because what happened didn't come out of nowhere. There were about 30 seconds of warning that I completely failed to act on. Noah had powered up the drone right there in the living room, just to show my dad the startup sequence, the lights, the camera feed on his controller screen. He wasn't flying it yet, just hovering it maybe 2 feet off the carpet, letting it idle while he walked my dad through the controls. My dad was crouched down next to him, squinting at the screen like a little kid on Christmas morning. And that image, my dad's full, undivided attention locked onto my son, must have been the thing that finally broke something loose in Daniel. Because that's when he started talking. His voice came out low at first, almost conversational. Standing there in the middle of the living room, he looked at my dad and said, "You know, Ava draws. She's been drawing since she was 4 years old. She won a school art competition last spring." My dad looked up briefly and said, "That's great, Danny," in that distracted tone that meant he'd already moved on. He looked right back at Noah's controller screen. And there it was. "That's great, Danny." 3 words. Delivered like a receipt being handed back at a checkout counter. I saw Daniel's expression shift. Something behind his eyes just closed. Like a door swinging shut. His voice came back harder this time. "She won first place, Dad. Out of the whole district. There was a ceremony. We sent you a picture." My dad straightened up slightly and said, without looking away from Noah, "I remember. That was real good. Hey Noah, can you switch it to the wide-angle lens?" The drone tilted slightly in the air, its rotors humming. Noah reached for the controller setting, and Daniel took 2 steps forward. His voice cracked open then. All that careful control splitting right down the middle. "Do you even know what she drew? Do you know what the painting was about? Did you even look at the picture we sent you?" My dad finally turned to look at him. His expression was confused, a little annoyed, the expression of a man who genuinely didn't understand why the temperature in the room had just changed. "Daniel, what's gotten into you? We're having a good time here." Right then, something tightened in my chest so hard, I almost couldn't breathe. I stood up from the couch. I don't even remember deciding to do it. My body just moved. But I wasn't fast enough. Daniel's voice rose, raw and ugly, and years in the making. "A good time, right? Noah shows up with an $8,000 drone and you're down on your knees like it's the second coming. Ava wins a district-wide art competition, and you say that's real good, and go back to staring at a screen. You've been doing this my whole life, Dad. My whole life." My dad started to stand up, his face going red. "Now, hold on just a minute." But Daniel wasn't finished. He turned and looked at Noah, and I saw it on his face. Not hatred, not cruelty, but something worse. A man at the absolute end of his rope who'd stopped caring what he broke on the way down. Without another word, Daniel reached out and grabbed the drone right out of the air with both hands. Noah yelped and grabbed for it, but Daniel was already moving. He swung it down and smashed it into the hardwood floor with everything he had. The sound it made hit me like something physical. That sharp, splintering crack of the frame splitting, the camera housing shattering, pieces skidding across the floor in every direction. The rotors made one last desperate whir and went silent. Noah stood there with his hands still out in front of him, like he was still holding something. His face was completely white. His mouth was open but no sound came out. For one full second, the entire room was absolutely silent. Then Ava screamed. Not a loud scream. A small, terrified sound from the corner of the room, like she'd been waiting for something terrible to happen and it finally had. Sarah grabbed Ava and pulled her close. My mom appeared in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in her hands, frozen. My dad stood there with his mouth open, not saying a single word. And Daniel, still breathing hard, looked down at what he'd done. Then he looked up at me, and he laughed. It was a short, bitter sound, not happy, not triumphant. The laugh of a man who'd finally done the thing he couldn't take back, and felt nothing but the cold relief of it. That laugh went through me like an electric current. Every rational thought I had just left my body. I didn't think about consequences. I didn't think about Noah watching. I didn't think about anything at all. I crossed that room in 3 steps, and I did something I can't take back. I didn't think. I just reacted. My hands hit Daniel's shoulders before my brain had even finished processing what I was doing. I shoved him. Hard. With everything I had. He stumbled backward, arms pinwheeling, and went down into the glass coffee table behind him. The table didn't just tip over, it shattered. That thick decorative glass top my mom had picked out years ago, the one she'd never let us put our feet on as kids, exploded into pieces when Daniel's back came down on it. The sound was enormous in that small room, bigger than the drone breaking, bigger than Ava's scream. Just this massive final crash that seemed to shake the walls. For one suspended moment, nobody moved. Daniel was on the floor, surrounded by glass, one hand pressed to the back of his arm where a piece had caught him. His face was stunned, not angry yet, just stunned, like he couldn't quite process what had just happened. I was standing over him, chest heaving, hands still out in front of me. And then everyone started moving at once. My mom dropped the dish towel and rushed toward Daniel, nearly slipping on a piece of glass. She went down to her knees beside him and grabbed his arm, her voice high and sharp. Danny, look at me. Are you okay? Can you move your arm? She looked up at me then, and the expression on her face was something I'd never seen from her before. Not fear, not confusion, pure, cold fury. She looked straight at me and said, "What is wrong with you?" "He's bleeding, Emily." Daniel pressed himself up to sitting, jaw tight, teeth clenched against whatever pain he was feeling in his arm. He looked up at me from the floor and said, his voice low and deliberate, "You just assaulted me. You know that, right?" In front of witnesses. Right then, something shifted in the room. The word assaulted landed differently than anything else that had happened that night. Because it wasn't just an accusation between siblings anymore. It was a legal word. A word with consequences attached to it. My dad stepped forward and put himself physically between me and Daniel, both hands raised. Okay, everybody stop. Just stop right now." But stopping wasn't something any of us were capable of in that moment. I looked down at Daniel and said, my voice shaking, "He destroyed Noah's drone. He destroyed something my son saved up for an entire year. What did you expect me to do?" Daniel let my mom help him to his feet. His right hand clamped over a cut on his left forearm, blood seeping between his fingers. He looked at me with that same flat expression he'd had right before everything exploded, and said, "I expected you to be a grown adult. But I guess that was too much to ask." I took a step forward. My dad grabbed my arm. "Emily, stop." I stopped, but my whole body was shaking. I turned around to find Noah. He was standing against the far wall near the hallway, as far from everyone as he could get in that room. His arms were wrapped around his own chest. His eyes were moving from me to Daniel to the broken glass on the floor, and back again, over and over, like he was trying to figure out which thing to be most afraid of. That image hit me harder than anything else that had happened, harder than the drone breaking, harder than the table shattering. My son standing there alone, holding himself together with his own arms, watching his mother and his uncle bleed in his grandparents' living room on Thanksgiving night. The guilt that came with that landed on me like something physical and heavy. I started moving toward him. "Noah, hey, look at me. I'm right here." But before I could reach him, Sarah appeared in the hallway doorway with her phone in her hand. Her face was pale and completely steady, the expression of a woman who had already made a decision. She looked at Daniel first, then at me, then back at Daniel, and said quietly but clearly, "I'm calling 911. And just like that, this stopped being a family argument. My mom made a sound like she'd been struck. My dad said, "Sarah, let's just calm down before we do anything we can't undo." But Sarah was already talking into the phone. Her voice was low and measured, giving our address, describing the situation. Daniel sat down heavily on the couch, my mom pressing the dish towel against his arm, and he didn't tell Sarah to stop. He just let her make the call. He looked across the room at me while she did it. And that's when someone called the police. When the police walked in, this stopped being a family issue. 2 officers came through the front door about 12 minutes after Sarah made the call. 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. We'd spent that time in a kind of awful suspended state. Nobody talking, nobody leaving, just existing in the wreckage of what had happened. My mom kept pressure on Daniel's arm. My dad sat in his armchair with his elbows on his knees and his head down. Sarah had taken Ava upstairs. Noah was still against the wall, and I'd gotten close enough to put my arm around him, but he was stiff and quiet in a way that scared me more than tears would have. The officers were professional and calm in that practiced way that told me they'd walked into worse situations than this plenty of times before. The first one, a tall woman with close-cropped hair, did a quick visual sweep of the room. Broken glass. Shattered drone pieces still scattered across the floor. Daniel with a dish towel wrapped around his forearm. Me standing across the room with my son pressed against my side. She didn't have to ask what happened. The room told most of the story on its own. They separated us immediately. First officer stayed with Daniel and my parents. Second officer, a younger guy with a calm, unhurried manner, walked me and Noah into the kitchen. He pulled out a notepad and looked at me and said, "Can you walk me through what happened tonight? Starting from the beginning?" I took a breath, and I told him. All of it. The drone, Daniel grabbing it, the smash, the laugh, me pushing him. I didn't try to dress it up or minimize it. I was an ER doctor. I understood the importance of accurate information. I told him exactly what I'd done and exactly why I'd done it. From the living room, I could hear Daniel talking to the other officer. His voice was controlled, measured, the voice of a man making a very deliberate case. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. Property destruction. Physical assault. Unprovoked. That last word hit me like a slap. Unprovoked. Like the drone hadn't just been smashed into pieces 30 seconds before I touched him. Like Noah wasn't standing right there when it happened. The officer in the kitchen with me wrote everything down without reacting. When I finished, he looked up and said, "Ma'am, I have to be straight with you. Based on what you've described and what we're seeing, there are potential charges on both sides here. Your brother for destruction of property, and you for assault. I'd known it was coming. I was a rational adult. I understood the law. But hearing it said out loud in my parents' kitchen on Thanksgiving night, with my son sitting at the kitchen table staring at his hands, something in me just collapsed inward. I kept my face steady. I said, "I understand." What followed was about an hour of statements, my parents. Sarah, who came back downstairs after getting Ava settled. Even Noah, gently and briefly, the officer kneeling down to his level, keeping his voice soft. Noah answered in short, quiet sentences. Yes, it was his drone. Yes, his uncle grabbed it. Yes, he saw his mom push his uncle. He said it all without looking up from the table. By the end of that hour, Daniel had formally stated his intention to press charges against me for assault. I'd formally stated my intention to press charges against him for destruction of property. My mom sat on the kitchen stool with her hands folded in her lap and said nothing to either of us. My dad stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room and looked at the floor. The officers gave us both documentation, explained the next steps, and left. The front door closed behind them, with a quiet, final click. And just like that, we weren't just family anymore. We were a case. Two people who'd grown up in the same house, shared the same holidays, carried the same last name, now reduced to opposing parties in a legal dispute. Standing on opposite sides of our parents' kitchen on Thanksgiving night, with a broken drone and a shattered coffee table, and a 12-year-old boy caught somewhere in the middle. The silence at home was louder than any argument. The drive back to Chicago that night was the longest 2 hours of my life. Noah sat in the passenger seat with his hood up and his earbuds in, which was his way of telling me he didn't want to talk. I didn't push him. I kept both hands on the wheel and watched the highway lights slide past in the dark and tried to hold myself together until I could get him home and get him into bed and then fall apart somewhere he couldn't see me. He didn't take his earbuds out until we pulled into our driveway. He sat there for a moment after I cut the engine, staring straight ahead through the windshield. Then, without looking at me, he said quietly, "Is my drone completely gone?" I felt that question in every part of my body. I said, "Yeah, buddy, I think it is." He nodded once, got out of the car, went inside, didn't say another word that night. That was the moment the full weight of what I'd done landed on me. Not during the fight, not when the police were there, not even on the highway. Right there in my own driveway, watching my 12-year-old son walk into our house alone on Thanksgiving night, carrying something no kid should have to carry. In the weeks that followed, I watched Noah change in ways that were subtle but impossible to miss if you were paying attention. He stopped talking about the drone. Completely. He'd been working on a YouTube channel, nothing big, just a hobby, filming local parks and posting edits with music. He'd had about 200 subscribers. After that night, he never posted again. He stopped bringing it up around his friends, stopped watching drone videos before bed the way he used to. It was like that whole part of him just went quiet. His school counselor called me about 3 weeks in. She said Noah had been withdrawing in class. Not disruptive, not acting out, just absent. Sitting in the back, not volunteering answers the way he used to, eating lunch alone a few days a week. She asked if anything had happened at home. I told her the short version. She recommended we get him into therapy. I made the appointment that same afternoon. His therapist, a calm, patient woman named Dr. Reeves, told me after the third session that Noah wasn't just grieving the drone. He was processing the fear of what he'd witnessed. Seeing the two adults he trusted most in the world, me and Daniel, turn on each other that violently, in a space that was supposed to be safe, had shaken something fundamental in him. She said kids that age are still building their understanding of how adults handle conflict. And what Noah had learned that night was a lesson I never meant to teach him. On my end, I wasn't doing much better. I went back to work the Monday after Thanksgiving, and I functioned, because functioning is what I do, it's what the ER requires of you, whether you're okay or not. But I was running on autopilot. I'd replay that moment over and over in the break room, in the car, at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep, the feel of my hands on Daniel's shoulders, the sound of the table, Noah's face against the wall. I started my own therapy in December, not because I wanted to, because Dr. Reeves gently suggested that Noah's healing would be connected to mine, and that was the only argument that could have gotten me through that door. As for Daniel, I heard through my mom that he'd started an anger management program. Whether that was voluntary or part of a legal agreement, I didn't know. We hadn't spoken since that night, not once. The charges were still unresolved. Our attorneys were handling it. My mom called me every Sunday, and we talked about everything except what had happened, which meant our conversations lasted about 4 minutes before running out of road. My dad hadn't called at all. Nobody won that night. Not me. Not Daniel. Not Ava. who'd watched her dad fall apart and her aunt shove him into a glass table. And especially not Noah, who'd saved up an entire year of his life for something that was gone in 3 seconds. And that's when I realized this was never really about that night. That night was just the place where everything that had been buried for 30 years finally broke through the surface. 3 months have passed since that night, and nothing is the same. But I'm not sure the same was ever something worth going back to. Noah is doing better. Slowly, carefully, in the way that real healing actually works, which is nothing like the movies. He started flying again about 6 weeks ago. Not with a new drone. We haven't gone there yet. Just a small beginner quadcopter, maybe $200, something he can crash without it meaning anything. He posted one short video last week. 12 seconds of footage from our backyard, just the tree line and the sky, 43 views. He showed me with a small, cautious smile, and I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight since Thanksgiving. I'm still in therapy, still working through what it means that my first instinct when someone I love was hurting was to use my hands. I'm an ER doctor. I've spent 15 years putting people back together, and in 30 seconds I undid a lot of that. I've had to sit with that. Really sit with it. Daniel started anger management. I don't know much beyond that. I don't know if he's doing it because he wants to or because he has to. I hope it's both. I hope somewhere in those sessions he's finding some of the same things I'm finding in mine, that the people who hurt us don't always mean to. That carrying 30 years of pain in silence doesn't make you strong. It just makes the explosion bigger when it finally comes. Our family isn't healed. I won't pretend it is. There are people in that house who may never fully come back from what happened in that living room, but I'm done pretending the cracks weren't already there. Done showing up and smiling and acting like everything was fine when it wasn't. If that night taught me anything, it's that unresolved pain always finds a way out, always. The only question is whether you choose how it comes out or whether it chooses for you. So, let me ask you something. If you were standing in that living room, if it was your kid, if it was your brother, if everything you'd swallowed for 30 years came rising up all at once in one single moment, would you have pushed him? Tell me honestly. What would you have done?